I'm really excited. And the state of the Union Black women and the coronavirus, this is a global issue. This is not just about the United States. So I'm so glad that we've got some international representation. This is awesome. Thanks, Elizabeth, for being here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead. Oh, thanks, that's so cool. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get started. We do have a long program, and I definitely want to be respectful of everyone's time, and people will come in and join as they can over the next couple of hours, but we've got some really awesome, talented women on this panel with me, so I'm really excited to get started. So let's just talk just some Zoom norms and procedures, and then just overall procedures for the event. As you have all noted, as you came in, you are muted. You will not have the ability to unmute yourself, but you will have the ability to engage with us. And the way you do that is through the chat functionality. You can find the chat in your toolbox. If you're on your computer, that's going to be a toolbox at the bottom, and it usually just says chat. If the chat function is not right there and visible, you can hit the more button, and then you'll be able to chat with us all. If you're on a mobile device, you have to hit more, and then you'll have the ability to chat with us all here. This is technology. We all are dependent sort of on Wi-Fi. So please have some grace as we move back and forth between PowerPoints and people talking. And if there's any sort of Wi-Fi connectivity issues, know that we are on it. But I'm sure you guys have gone to quite a few Zoom meetings. So I just ask for some grace as if there are any technical difficulties, we're here to learn and enjoy. And like I said, really build a community. So feel free to use that chat functionality as much as possible. So I want to talk a little bit about why we are here. And as I'm talking, feel free in the chat to talk about why you're here. Why did you get up so early on a Saturday morning? And come here and engage with us. There's so many things that we can do on a Saturday. One of them is sleeping in, right? And you chose to wake up bright and early and come hang out with us. And we feel really blessed that you have decided to do so. So why we are here. So I just want to talk a little bit about a little bit of my philosophy. I very much stand for FUBU. If you don't know what FUBU is, that's for us, by us. And I believe in empowerment through education and entrepreneurship. This virtual town hall was a calling. I felt to myself, we are talking about so many inequities that the coronavirus has surfaced that we all know about already. Now let's do something about it. Let's convene, let's have community, let's dialogue. We started these dialogues a long time ago, last year in Long Island, when we all partnered together to do Sisters on Fire, this play. So we have a lot of folks who've done a lot of great things for our community on this panel. And we decided, wouldn't it be awesome now that we are all kind of stuck at home, if we could all find ways to connect with each other virtually and have this really important dialogue and discussion. What I think is really important within our Black community is that we support each other, we support our businesses, we support ourselves as women, we also support our brothers, and that we find ways to empower youth. Platforms like this, the ability to do these things, are so important. They're important because we need to instill pride in being Black. Oftentimes, people like to talk about reverse racism or to shame us for saying I'm Black, I love being Black, for being pro-Black. And I say, no, we should not feel shamed by any means or stretch of the imagination. If Jewish people can have yeshiva and go to yeshiva on Saturdays, why can't we come together as a people and talk about talk about the things that impact us, talk about the things that can empower us and can enlighten us. And that's our little way of doing that right now. I want to also try to ensure that we're not afraid of being who we are, that we're not afraid and kowtowed to white fragility, of the Karens of the world, of cowardly white men who walk around citing the Second Amendment to kill our people, especially our young men, with impunity. I want to take the time to just talk a little bit about some of the stats that really spoke to me. And as I was thinking about what did I want to share today and what I wanted to start the day off and thinking about, we're going to talk some things that are going to be deep, but I also want to leave us in a place of hope and a place of change. Let's rest with these statistics for right now. The first thing that pops up to me is this rate of Black infant deaths are more than double than white infant deaths. This was as of 2015. The disparities keep getting larger. There was question and thought about why was that? And what's happening and what research is telling us is that the racial discrimination experienced by Black mothers during their lifetime makes them less likely to carry their babies to full term. Someone who tells you that stress does not affect you day in and day out in the next generations is wrong and erroneous. Stress is serious. And being Black in this world is stressful. It's a beautiful thing. I love being Black, but it is stressful, and we must acknowledge that. When we're talking about economic disparities, the typical white family in America has 10 times the wealth of a typical Black family, a figure that has barely changed in 2 decades and has actually widened. So you can think about what's going on with the coronavirus. That will continue to widen that disparity as we continue to go forward. That's the third quote I read in a Harvard Business Review, and I was floored. Being a person of color in America, i.e. Black, let's be clear what they're really talking about. Being a Black person in America is bad for your health. Sorry for that typo, that actually came directly from the Harvard. I just copy pasted it. Blacks have higher rates of diabetes, hypertension, and heart disease than other groups. And Black children have a 500% higher death rate from asthma compared with white children. If you know anything about the coronavirus, these are all underlying factors that make the illness even more susceptible to people in these who have these diseases. Remember, we were told that this would never affect children. Well, we know it's affecting our children, and it's affecting our Black children more than our white children, most likely because of this rate of asthma that we have. I found some other statistics kind of startling and also in a way hopeful. In the 1960s, 40% of Blacks had their own businesses. 87% of Black families were 2-parent households. Today, less than 7% of Blacks own businesses and only 25% of Black families are 2-parent. What changed? Obviously, we don't have the full answer now, but I think it's worth us thinking about. One of the things I very much believe in, I think everyone else on the panel does too, is the importance of entrepreneurship, multiple streams of income to gain wealth. And so we need to get back to these statistics where we had more businesses and we kept more of our money in our community. And I put this up on the Power and Grace because did you know I had the privilege 2 years ago to speak at a conference, an education conference in Kansas City, Missouri. And in Kansas City is the Negro League Baseball Museum. If you ever thought to yourself, why would I ever go to Kansas City? Well, there's a reason to go. That's actually a fabulous museum. It is really important to our history. But here's something I did not know. I did not know that there were Black female owners of the Black baseball teams. I thought that was fascinating and empowering. And to me, that's a message of hope, right? That is awesome. So I wanted to just like bring that to your attention if you didn't know that before. And then I decided to just talk a little bit about this because I thought that this meme with Colin Kaepernick says a lot. You're mad at me for kneeling, mad at Rosa Parks for sitting, mad at MLK for marching, mad at Muhammad Ali for not fighting your Vietnam War, but you're not mad at yourself for slavery. Anyone who says that slavery and what happened in the past does not matter today does not understand history, the ramifications of the economic, the health disparities, and the division that we have within our own community as a result of being essentially chattel in this country. That being said, I think what's also great is that we are an amazing people, because despite all that, despite our ancestors coming from Africa and different countries in Africa speaking different languages, we built this country. Despite all that, we still survive, we still thrive, we still love, we still dance and are happy. We still make uplifting music. We still empower each other and one another. So before we go to the panelists, I wanted to just talk about this last piece. We can fall, we can break, we can fail, but more importantly, as a people, we rise, we heal, and we overcome. Okay, I have the honor and privilege of introducing our panelists, and then they're going to talk about themselves as well as we go forth. I'm not really going to talk about me because I just spoke for quite a bit of time, but just really quickly, Kumara Thompson, I have an education consulting company, Thompson Education Consulting, but more importantly, I am one of the proud producers of Sisters on Fire, which is an awesome play that two of our panelists wrote, Marsha Mcnair and Anissa Moore. And so that's just a little bit about me. So let's go to our panelists. First is Dr. Anjara Jackson. She is an alumni of Yale and received her MD from Boston University School of Medicine. She trained and practiced at Morristown Memorial Hospital for 20 years. She served for 28 years as a member of the New Jersey State Committee, which reviews maternal mortality and makes recommendations to address specific issues of concern. She is a member of the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology and the Society of Maternal Fetal Medicine. Dr. Jackson is an avid supporter of education, healthcare, and the arts. Next, we have Anissa Moore. Anissa is a playwright, poet, and choral director. She was appointed as the Dean of Social and Behavioral Sciences at Nassau Community College. She is the first African-American woman to serve in this administrative position. Ms. Moore's creative works include the collaboration Sisters on Fire, a drama musical regarding the African-American woman experience. Anissa is a recipient of the John L. Kurtz Trailblazer Award, granted by the Economic Opportunity Commission of Nassau County for her outstanding leadership in Nassau County. On November 3rd, 2015, Anissa D. Moore became the first African-American woman elected on the Long Beach City Council. Anissa is committed to social justice. She has served within numerous organizations. She was focused on mentoring at-risk women and children in New York City and Long Island. Next, we have Marsha Mcnair. Marsha was an assistant editor at Essence Magazine and is currently an associate professor of English, journalism, and women's studies at Nassau Community College. She is the former coordinator of the NCC African American Read-In and a current member of the Black History Month Committee and the secretary for the Black Women's Initiative, a student retention program. She is the executive director and founder of Long Island Girl Talk, a program for teen girls interested in media. Her professional memberships include Sigma Delta Chi, the Society of Professional Journalists, and the American Association of University Women. Dr. Karen Deadweiler is next. Apostle Dr. Karen is an executive pastor, inspirational empowerment speaker, preacher, prophetess, health awareness speaker, nurse, entrepreneur, columnist, and author of 3 self-published books. Join me in welcoming our panelists. I'm actually going to stop the screen share so that we can actually see the panelists in their entirety. And I'm going to start with Dr. Jackson. If you could just tell us a little bit around who you are, your expertise, and how coronavirus is affecting your area of expertise.
Well, good morning, and I'm really happy to be participating in this panel and would like to welcome everyone. I'm just going to say a quick shout out to two people who I saw, my friend Cynthia from New Orleans and Lorna from here in Florida, where I am right now. As my daughter mentioned, she gave actually quite a wonderful introduction. I specifically did high-risk obstetrics. And clearly, during this time of the coronavirus, health issues are at the forefront. It's always a sort of anxiety-ridden and stressful time for any pregnant woman, particularly in first pregnancies. But during this coronavirus epidemic, COVID-19 outbreak, there are so many questions and unknowns that people are really afraid. It's a time that's to be celebrated, and it still is, but it's also a time right now of increased anxiety, both in terms of how this virus might affect the pregnant woman herself, and if she does become infected, how that might have an effect on the pregnancy and the baby. There's not a lot of information that is really known right now. Most of it is anecdotal, but the good news is that there doesn't seem to be at this moment any direct ill effect on the babies. There's only been, as far as I know, one case where the baby was actually positive for the virus, but was not symptomatic. Now, there has been a small study where the virus has been seen in the placenta, but actually what that means clinically, no one really knows. Most of those babies were born healthy. Unfortunately, because it is a time when women tend to have a support person with them, usually the partner, the father of the baby, or a partner for that person, or a doula and our family members, it's been that much more challenging because many hospitals had to put rules into place such that they couldn't allow a support person there. That was both to protect those mothers as well as the babies for everybody who was delivering during those times. I think most hospitals have lifted that now, and at least the father of the baby can be in the delivery room. So many precautions are being taken. I think it's important for people to know, not just from the point of view of going to a hospital to have a baby, but also just going for your routine health maintenance now, and also going to the hospital if you are in need is something that you should do. You should not let the coronavirus keep you from going to the hospital if you're having signs or symptoms of, say, a severe asthma attack, a stroke, or a heart attack. So it is really important to know that we all need to take precautions. The hospitals and medical facilities are also taking precautions. And don't put off medical care if you need it. And again, don't be afraid in terms of pregnancy, in terms of going to the hospital and having a baby either. If you have specific concerns, you should always speak to your healthcare provider. I think I'll stop there just in terms of giving a little bit of an overview, but still right now there are many more questions than there are answers. But we do know that for right now, it doesn't seem as though there's a direct effect on the fetuses and the developing babies from the coronavirus. I will add one last thing before stopping for now, and that is to say that certainly as Black women, we do have potentially a greater impact from the coronavirus on our health because of all those reasons that Kwamara listed before, because of the underlying obesity, history of diabetes, and high blood pressure. So whether you're pregnant or not, there are those, increased potentially worsening outcome because of those underlying health issues.
Great, thank you so much. And I don't know if anyone caught that, but yes, Dr. Jackson is my mother. So it's a family affair over here. But it's so interesting, Mom, that you just said that, because I literally had a conversation with someone who knows someone who is pregnant during this time, who was having teleconferences with their healthcare provider, with their doctor, but was feeling not themselves. And, the doctor kept telling them, no, you're fine, you're fine. And she really just didn't feel fine. So she went to the hospital and ended up having really, really high blood pressure. And they were saying that she was on the verge of potentially having preeclampsia. So all that to say, yes, absolutely, yes, talk to your healthcare providers, but also listen to your body and go in as needed, especially if you feel like you need care, especially if you are pregnant right now.
Yeah, you are totally right. And I agree that, for pregnancy, telemedicine is really very difficult. So if you're not, high risk, and if you do feel well, it's probably okay to have 1 or 2 visits that way, but really you need to be seen and your complaints need to be taken seriously. And I totally agree with you. If you feel something just isn't right, then you should make sure you have to be your own best advocate, to be honest with you. You have to be your own advocate. Yes.
Absolutely. Okay, Anissa.
Good morning to everyone. It's a pleasure
Morning.
to be a part of this wonderful panel. I think as a co-author of Sisters on Fire, I think we use that platform to give voice to issues that concern African-American women. And now today we're here and I'm excited about giving voice to issues that concern us as it relates to health, because obviously health is one of the issues, but linked to health would also be the lack of information that was available within the African-American community to understand the seriousness as it relates to this virus. That was one of the major challenges. But then also connecting that to the lack of grief care that's available within our communities. So I'm interested in talking about that today. I'm also interested in talking about what is our response now as a Black community, now that we're aware of, now that the coronavirus has really unveiled some of the health inequalities, but then also connecting that to how can we still live within our communities when clearly the level of racial profiling has taken a different turn, right, as relates to who looks suspicious as a result of wearing these masks, right? So there's so many different levels, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation today. And then also, and I'm so glad Apostle's here, connecting this to what now is the role of the Black church as we now have to work on this whole issue of grief care, because in many diverse communities, grief care is a part of the ministry. So now there's a burden, because usually it's a burden on the pastor and the ministerial staff, right? So in my church, Evangel Revival Church, I'm a part of that ministerial staff. So we're having a meeting Tuesday to figure out whose role is this now, because there are too many people, right, to console and to comfort as it relates to the pastoral role. So every piece of this is affecting us. But it's also what happens with families as it relates to the need for money and economic stability, right? So this is also, it's just revealing a whole lot of things, but in the midst of our pain, if we speak to this suffering, then we can heal, we can overcome. We're gonna have to do this together. So I look forward to the conversation. I'm really excited about that conversation. And as it relates to Long Island, I think people need to understand the seriousness of what's happening. If you are from Long Island, you may be aware of the fact that in Freeport has the highest level in terms of Nassau County in comparison to Hempstead. Hempstead has 2,143 confirmed cases. That means that 38.7 people per 1,000 people have it, right? And then once you leave Hempstead and you go to Freeport, it's close to 1,600 people that have it, right? So this is a real serious situation, and we have to take this very seriously, and we have to think about what's happening in Hempstead, what's happening in Freeport, right? In terms of healthcare, but then also in terms of economic stability, right? Because we can make clear and distinct links to those things. Now, again, I'm a resident of Long Beach. We only have 727 confirmed cases, but the African-American population is only 6% of the entire population, right? So you have to think about that. And how did information go out? And how were people informed? And then hopefully today we'll also talk about the role of Black media, right? What is the Black journalist's responsibility to getting this information out to people so that they have information so that they can move forward and educate the community. So I look forward to that conversation today. And I hope we also link this to the census, right? because all of a sudden when it's time for us to be counted, we're not going to be counted because the coronavirus is actually killing us. So we need to have a serious conversation about this today, and I'm excited. And I also want to recognize some of my colleagues that are here. I see Carol Gilliam is here, and Cheryl McBride, and my partner in justice, D. Melanie Hammer is here. So thank you so much for being with us. I look forward to the conversation.
Great, thank you. That's awesome. I didn't even think about the role of Black media, so I am really excited to dig into that and really hold them to task because that is super important. Next up, Marsha.
Oh, well, good morning, everyone, and thanks for attending this very important conversation. And Kwamara asked me to be a part of this to really share my perspective as an educator. And so as I was thinking about the impact of COVID on education, I realized that people of color have some particular concerns that perhaps other groups do not have to be worried about. You know, education for us has always been the traditional method of rising out of poverty. And now that is being threatened. So we're really at a turning point, and how this whole crisis is handled will pretty much determine the not just the educational future of our Black and Brown communities, but the economic futures, the ability to achieve the so-called American dream, which pretty much now has become a nightmare for many of us. What the crisis has revealed, what the COVID crisis has revealed, is the enormous amount of educational inequities that we were all aware of, but now I think the country at large is aware of those educational inequities, because in order to provide or engage in remote education of any sort, what do you have to have access to? You have to have access to technology. And the majority of poor Black and Brown families do not. Children need a place to be able to study. They don't have their own bedrooms. They don't have access to Wi-Fi. All of these are advantages in the educational system. And so that's why this switch to long distance education has really been difficult and had a very negative impact, I think, on Black and Brown communities. Even in terms of, you know, thinking of early education, and I'm at the college level, but I definitely see the connection between what happens as children are growing up and being prepared for their higher education. And you know, as women of color, we really have to keep an eye on this, because we're affected, not just in terms of the children who aren't able to get an education, but we tend to dominate, at least in early childhood, we tend to dominate that field in terms of childcare providers, teachers' aides, and so forth. All right, Black and Brown women are the ones who are running these daycare centers, and their inability to work, the children not being able to get an education. This coronavirus is affecting us in a multitude of ways. It's very complex, and I'm glad we're here today, really to talk about that and to possibly come up with some solutions that where we're not looking to anyone on the outside, but we can be proactive as a group, right, as Black women, and start working on these problems, because I think it's become abundantly clear to me that the government is not going to do it.
Yeah, Marsha, I totally agree with you. That's why we have to have these circles. We have to have our own empowerment circles. I think one of the traps that we have always fallen into is looking towards other, waiting for other to do things for us, when we have the knowledge, the power, the intelligence, and the wealth to do it for ourselves. And so I love that you said that. Okay, Dr. Karen, you're next.
Hello, everyone, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited about this situation because there's two things that, as a church, we've been dealing with. One, you've been hearing people talk about protection, which is Psalms 91, being protected by God. And the other part we're talking about is repentance, forgiving your sins and turning away from the wicked ways. But I have a threefold trajectory because I want to look at more people instead of being worried about being afraid or being worried about your wicked ways and sins. At this point in life, we got to worry about trusting God. And so I'm encouraging people to trust God in the midst of all that you're going through. I know that times are hard, but God does have the last say. So coronavirus doesn't have God. God has the coronavirus. He's still in control of everything. And so a lot of people are fearful. Don't be fearful. But I think it's making a lot of people turn to the church, where a lot of people had left the church. They looked at the church as people instead of as God. So when they left the building, they were leaving because they were saying it was hypocritical and it was this and that because of sin, but not really realizing the church is us itself, and the church is really ultimately God. Going to, as me, I'm a Christian. So Christianity, of course, I'm a believer in Jesus Christ. And a lot of people didn't even have a relationship with Jesus Christ. They had a relationship with the church and what was in the building, but they forgot to realize that the author of the whole thing was Jesus Christ. And so they missed it. So with the coronavirus, I find that they are coming back. They are praying. They're asking God for help. And they weren't doing as much of that. Let me say that, because I will never say that they weren't doing it. The church wasn't doing their job. But I think the church had fallen asleep because of the world situation, the lack of education, the lack of wisdom, because of what was going on in the streets. We were more turned to trying to help outside on a, I guess you would say, a physical basis, and instead of on a spiritual basis, realizing to tell the people, listen, God can help you, God can heal you, you can overcome this with the help of God. So I was excited to be a part of this, to learn. Certainly we need wisdom in everyday life, but we also need wisdom in the church, because the churches are closing and opening. That's a big issue right now. As for me and my church, we closed it because I felt like this: it was better to be safe than sorry. And I know a lot of the churches are opening because of the money, but this is the time where we're going to have to trust God for the finances. If this is his church, he'll take care of it. And so we don't have to worry about that at this point. But you've got to be careful, because our job as pastors is to protect the sheep. And if you're opening your church, and this is just me, I'm speaking of me for my own church and my relationship with God. If you're opening your church and you're risking your sheep of death and sickness and disease, then maybe you need to ask God, is that the right thing to do? Is that wisdom? Because as church members, we still must follow the law. And so I think that's the biggest thing that's going on right now. Protect the sheep from the church. And as far as the grief and the funerals, we're overwhelmed with that. And so yes, we do have to put something together, because it's too many families and too much for one pastor or two pastors to handle. In the case of me, I have a small church, so it's not so bad, but I did lose a member that we do have to bury. And you have to speak to, and it was sudden, a suddenly thing, because sometimes corona doesn't put you in the hospital. And I don't know if he or she died of corona, but the fact of the matter is, if you died right now, you cannot have a proper funeral, you cannot have a proper burial, you can't have people coming around to support you. People are not talking about that. When you lose someone, you need support. And right now, with the quarantines and all of this, whether it was corona or not, you're being quarantined, you're being pushed off. So you're battling it by yourself. And that's where the church comes in. We've got to be able to step in and send somebody for help. And thank God for having a relationship with Christ, that we're able to help those who are in need. But on the other hand, you have to be able to help yourself. You've got to pray. You've got to read your word. You've got to be educated on the corona, on Black women, everything. It must start at home, and then it will get to the church.
Thank you so much, Dr. Karen. Some very powerful words from the spiritual community. Some things that really resonated with me, especially as an educator and as someone who loves books. And I really thank my parents for instilling the love of books. We read all the time. And my mom will tell you that I was never the child that you had to tell, turn off the TV to do your homework. It was always put that book away and do your homework, and then you could go back and read some more. But I think it is so important that we also get educated outside of the regular K-12 American public school system. This is also a part of that as well. We have to educate ourselves as a people, as a community. We have to educate the generation that's coming after us. So I think that's so helpful for you to have said that, Dr. Karen. The other thing is, before we started, Dr. Karen and I were talking about the number of deaths that are happening and all the grieving that the churches really are stepping up in terms of the spiritual community. And one of the things that I said that a lot of folks were not thinking about is we've lost a lot of teachers, especially here in New York City. And that's going to be very traumatic for our students who are looking for consistency for when they go back into the classroom and they're looking for that familiar face and they remember Miss Thompson or Miss Jackson or whomever, and to find out that those people had passed away, they didn't have a chance to grieve. And so I do think that we are going to continue to suffer post-traumatic stress from all of the things that are happening during this pandemic. And so this is definitely something else that we need to talk and think about. Before we go into some video clips and stuff that I have that I would like us to react to, and then we'll go into the audience for questions. And participants, if you have questions, you can start populating the chat right now. I also have some questions that people had sent over when they RSVP that we will go through as well. But I am here to also talk a little bit about the financial implication of coronavirus upon our community. And I talked a little bit about that earlier in terms of the disparity between white wealth and Black wealth. But I think one of the important things is because we are put in situations where, generally speaking, the majority of us have what are considered blue collar jobs now have been transformed to essential workers, i.e. hourly wages, minimum wages. We are now finding that we have to go out to work and we have to risk our health because we need money to survive in this world. And that didn't just come about because that's just the way the world is. It came about because there were so many racial inequities that set up a system that allowed for Black folks particularly to really have to rely on these more blue collar worker essential type jobs as nurses, as healthcare providers, as educators, as your grocery worker, right? And so we're seeing that play out. The other thing is, and we'll talk about this a little bit in the segments that I picked out in terms of clips, but I think it's something really important to note is our housing crisis, which is also tied to economic disparity. We have lots of folks in our community who cannot afford homes and therefore live in housing projects and live one on top of the other. And so when you're talking about social distancing, how can you social distance and be safe when you live in a housing project?
Right.
You can't.
You can't. You're going to be running into people in the elevator. You're going to be running into people in the community center. I think someone on the panel mentioned that oftentimes, I think it was you, Marsha, that students don't have their own place to study. Well, they don't have their own place to study because usually they may be living in a 1-2-bedroom apartment with their siblings, with their mother, with their grandmother. There could be 3 generations living in one small, tiny apartment and household together. And one of the statistics that came out of New Orleans, Louisiana, which is where my mother and my family is from, is we know that there are obviously quite a few disparities as to why COVID is really affecting Black folks. But one of the reasons is because we can't social distance. And even in communities where there's not a lot of high rises, like there are in New York City, there's homes, but in those homes, there could be up to 10 family members living in a small single family home. And that's what we're seeing a lot in these rural communities as well. So just some things to think about in terms of how the economic systems that have put us into these crises of not being able to get our own independent wealth, not being able to have generational wealth that we can pass on to generations after us, have really even led us into more susceptible outcomes when diseases like this happen, when inequities like this happen. And so I want to just talk about I wanted to just highlight all of the ways that the coronavirus is really affecting our economy as a Black folk, right? And then we do have folks out there who do believe in businesses, who are entrepreneurial, who have mom and pop shops and have had to close. And they went after those loans just like everybody else. And you will see overwhelmingly, a lot of our Black-owned businesses did not receive any help or funding for lots of reasons. Part of that is because they already weren't receiving funding. I think I mentioned before in a previous meeting that we had that only 3% of businesses are able to access the loans and all of the venture capitalist money, et cetera, that is out there for all these other businesses. And we continue to see that disparity. So when states start opening back up, when businesses start opening back up, you're going to see less and less Black entrepreneurship, which is the exact opposite of what we need. We need more Black entrepreneurship. We need more money flooding our own economy and our own dollars. So not last words, but before I go into any clips, did anyone else on the panel wanted to say anything to any of the things that the panelists said?
Yes, actually, I wanted to just piggyback a couple of things on what you just said. One is certainly, you know, the lack of relationships and locations of banks in our communities in terms of accessing money. And then the other is the dependence upon public transportation by lots of people of color. And then going back to something that Anissa said, she mentioned the census, which is absolutely critical. We do need to be counted, but I also wanted to say we need to make our voices heard in terms of our elections. We don't take it seriously enough, but we need to be watching not only the national, but state and local elections as well. These people are the ones making the decisions, and we need to have a voice. You know, for people to say, oh, nobody's listening, it doesn't matter if I vote or not, that is not true. Because if you protest by not voting, you're actually giving the person on the other side your vote, essentially. So not only do we need to be counted in the census, but we need to make sure whether we have to social distance, wear our mask, and physically go vote, or whether we're doing it by mail, that our voices are counted.
And I'll just add one more item to what you just said and echo Dr. Jackson, and that is that we have the statistics. We know it's a fact that Black women vote. So we will really have a serious say as it relates to all of the elections that are taking place. And I just want to emphasize the fact that we need to focus in on your local election, because your local election affects everything that's taking place on your in your exact neighborhood. It's going to determine if your street is paved or not, if your garbage is picked up or not. It's everything, all right? And I think sometimes we forget because everybody's focused in on what Biden said right now, but right now we need to look at what's happening in your community. And in order to do that, you really have to look at your local leaders. And as I always say, then you need to begin to think about how you can become a local leader so that you can give voice for your community.
Right.
And also, I'd like to talk about the church. When it comes to the church, people are forgetting that the church is not getting tithes and offerings. And so you might want to look at, if you're in the local church and you have not lost your job and you do have extra money to keep the Black churches afloat, maybe you want to give a donation, maybe you want to do something like that. So it's a thought, because the financial Black churches are not getting any money unless they're even some of the bigger ones, because we're a nonprofit organization. So you might want to look at, if you have not lost any jobs, or if you have, or if you know a pastor that may need help. In the case of us, we do have outside revenue and other jobs, as she said, multiple avenues of revenue, but some pastors are working full time. And so they're not getting any financial help. So maybe you want to think about in your community if the financial pastor or the church needs help to survive.
Great, thank you, Dr.
And I wanted to note that another aspect that will mean possibly that our future generations might not be able to get into college or even go to college is the idea that in our communities of color, the reading level tends to be much lower than in other communities, especially among Black boys. And So if we think about remote education, long distance education, the basis of that is reading. And if our children cannot read, they will not be able to be successful going into college, going on for certain types of certification, because this is what COVID has brought out, is that there's going to be an entire shift in the educational field at the higher levels. So I think there's a certain complacency that, oh, you know, schools will reopen at some point, perhaps at the elementary and secondary levels, but not at the higher levels. The higher levels of education, your colleges, your universities, really are looking now at making a shift to more remote, more long distance education. Will we as a community be prepared for that? Knowing that our children, again, as I said, have a much lower reading level. And so Karen, one thing I'm hoping, you know, is that even places like churches can develop reading programs where we begin to take responsibility for teaching our children how to read, and perhaps using some of the old school methods that worked and that kind of gave way to a lot of experimental methods that were not successful. I know, like you know, Kwamara, I always had a book. I had a firm foundation in reading. It didn't necessarily come from my parents. It came from my education. They used to teach you to read in an entirely different way than they do now. So I'm thinking that, you know, our churches and our community-based organizations, we need to be aware of this trend that is happening in higher education and start preparing our children at younger ages so that later on they can achieve their educational goals.
I do need to say something here. I'm going to try to say it really quickly, Kamara, but I just want to make the connection between the church and literacy. One, from a historical perspective, we understand that the church was really the central focus of African-American life. And a part of that was literacy, right?
Yes.
Because initially you started with what we call Sunday school, right? And within Sunday school, you were exposed to literacy, what we consider what we call family literacy, because it was usually your grandmother or someone that was taking you to Sunday school. So you were learning on that level, or the actual Sunday school was reinforcing what you were learning in school. And a part of that was not only for you to be able to read and to comprehend, but also for you to give recitation, which means that you were able to take in this information and then speak orally about it. But in light of the fact that we're in the 2000s, people stopped sending their children to Sunday school, right? Because people made a decision they really didn't want to be a part of the Black church experience. But that was one of the benefits of being there, was education. Now, having said that, in the city of Long Beach, 2 years ago, the city of Long Beach decided, the school system decided that they were no longer going to allow for homework for kindergarten through 5th grade. And this is where, again, local comes in. The parents within the community said that their kids had too much homework, we can't do it anymore, let's talk to our school board, and they put it into policy, all right? So as a result, we had to make a decision within the Black and Brown community. We understood that that's the critical time where your child can be diagnosed if there are issues in terms of literacy acquisition. It's critical for them. And so we decided to go ahead and move forward with the Long Beach STEAM Academy. And so 3 days a week right now, pre-COVID, at the local church, I coordinate the Long Beach STEAM Academy. We've had the opportunity to coordinate with professors at Nassau Community College who come in and help with the reading as well as the math. Also, the physical sciences department is a part of our program because we've launched into STEM projects with them. But the first year we were unable to perform the STEM curriculum because our kids could not read. They could not read. I had 4th grade kids that couldn't even do basic computations of 4 + 2. They couldn't do it. So we started from scratch, from the beginning. It took them over a year, but now we're in our 3rd season. We'll be in our 3rd season in September. All of our kids are reading above reading level now. All of our kids love math. They hated math before. There was math anxiety because this is finally a safe space where they could learn, but also we recognize that they were seeing people that looked like themselves. And that does make a difference. So I just wanted to say, to link that to the Black church, the church wasn't charging the Long Beach STEAM Academy anything. It's an act of love from the church. So there are different ways that the Black church gets involved within the community. Sometimes we look at it saying, oh, it's just taking money. They're also giving things away. And now they also need money because they've been giving to people all of this time. And so we need to support our church as an institution, because if we don't have that institution, look in your communities, that's probably the only thing that the community owns in the community is the Black church. That's the reality when we talk about housing and we talk about economic stability in a community. So we have to, even if you're no longer a part of it, we have to support the Black church, because you're not going to see anything in your community and you're going to be giving the property away to developers. And we know what happens. Once the developers have the Black churches, then gentrification has completely taken over our community. So I want to express the seriousness of us being partners as we talk about literacy and we talk about economic stability and empowerment.
Can I respond to her?
Absolutely.
Okay. When you talk about the education, I agree with you wholeheartedly. I came from a different angle, because the kids weren't educated because the parents weren't educated. So we were educating the parents, doing forums, teaching them how not only to read and write, but how to get their own businesses, financial and health things. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. But if the parents don't have it, they can't teach the children. And if the school doesn't do it, the only thing left is the church. So I started with the parents, with the willing women, and teaching them different things, having forums, even with Marsha, and different things that we did to help the grown people do it. Because once we learn it, we can transfer it to our family. And once the church learns it, and the pastors have it, they can give it to the congregation, who can then take it home to their children. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. It does happen. It has to be in the church as well. Wisdom must be spiritual and natural from the church. Not just only God, but we must learn to teach them how to live every day, because life is important. We're not in church all day.
And I wanted to note, because I just saw a note from Adrian Whaley. Adrian, I'm glad you're here. And this kind of made me think about the fact that we do have resources in our community which simply need to be reimagined in terms of their mission. For the church, it is maybe going back to its original calling, but I think even our libraries, they can be reimagined to be technical centers. These can be places where our children, they have computers now, but this whole idea of expanding that, because even if you are given a laptop, because they have these various programs where children who did not have laptops could go pick one up. Someone has to show you how to use a laptop. All right, someone has to show you how to use the technology. That's what I found, even with my students at the college level, that many of them were just unfamiliar with the software. Who's going to do that? So we still need places where people can go to. Our community can be educated in general about how to use technology. And this can be not just on an educational level, but this would also help our mom and pop businesses who have, their brick and mortar business may be closed, but they could have a online business. But there have to be places where that type of training and the introduction to the new technology can take place, or we as a people will be left behind. And that's what frightens me the most, that we might be left behind as a result in this paradigm shift that's going on in society.
I think everyone is making excellent points right now, and especially around the importance of educating ourselves. And that seems to be the reoccurring theme, is that we have to educate ourselves. We cannot go outside. No one is going to care about ourselves, about our community, about our students, our kids, our babies, more than we do. No one is going to. And so we have got to take the onus. There's a quote that I've been, that I use quite frequently within the last few months. I didn't put it on here, but I will just say what it is, because every time we're talking, it keeps flashing in my mind. It's a Mark Twain quote, and it says, "I never let my schooling interfere with my education." I'm gonna say that again. I never let my schooling, so that means the K-12 public school system here in the United States, I never let my schooling interfere with my education. And that's the education you receive from your elders, from your community, from your churches, from your library, from everyone around you, from yourself, from self-learning, from reading and enjoying a love of reading. And so I definitely just wanted to highlight those things. I saw in the chat something that's actually really important that we haven't quite touched upon yet. And I've seen murmurings or glimpses of it in social media, but we really haven't highlighted as something that we need to talk about. And one of those things is domestic violence. So someone noted in the chat that because of the stay-at-home orders and the social distancing, self-quarantine orders, that a lot of folks, a lot of women and children are now being forced to live 24/7 with their abusers, with nowhere to go, right? Because the shelters are closed, because they can't social distance, etc. And so I would love to hear anybody's thoughts around that, because I do think that is something that we do need to start thinking about as a community.
Well, from the church.
About that, I mean, that was one of my first thoughts is what are, abused children going to do now that, school used to be a safe place for them. School was a place where they got a hot meal, maybe the only hot meal they would have for the day. And thinking about women who are trapped with abusive partners, that was truly heartbreaking to me. And I'm at a loss. I don't know, Kwamara, perhaps Karen, we might look to you for some sense of hope about this, because this is just unbelievable what people are going through now.
Yes. I think what we have to do as a church and as a community is we have to realize that they need a way of escape. And so you have to get the knowledge of what to do when they come to you. With kids, it's a different story because you have BCW and you have to be very careful. But with the adult, you have to be able to speak to that adult if the kids are being abused. And sometimes the adults are being abused, but you find out through the child, because the child is what we see more of, especially when it comes to education and school. The mother may not be at the school, so you may not see her being beat up, but you'll see the child. And so we have to have a way of escape for them, which is all these different programs. You need to know where to send them, who to get in touch with, maybe a social worker, maybe a counselor, maybe different groups where you can give them the opportunity if they want out. If the parents don't want out, then we have to look at maybe getting the children out. But you try to always work it as a family. And you try to find out who is the abuser, because everybody's saying a lot of times it's not only men these days. There's a lot of women abusers out here. And you learn that through the church, which is shocking to you, because we always look at the man abusing the woman. But there are a lot of women whose life has been messed up and they're taking it out on the kids. Or the other end is, I don't like the kid's father. So the kid is being abused. He's taking the abuse for the father, or she's taking the abuse. So we have to look at all of that. And from the church, of course, it's always praying, but it's always not only divine connection, but you have to have humanly connection to show them what to do and teach them how to go, and also teach them what is abuse. Because there's more than physical. there's verbal abuse, there's all different types. So you teach those things in church so they are aware they're being abused. Because a lot of people today, believe it or not, are not aware that they are being abused. They grew up like that. They think that's normal. And we as the church and as educators have to teach them, no, it's not normal for you to be called names. It's not normal for you to be grabbed or pushed. That is not normal. You may not be having a black eye, but at the same time, it's not normal to be making you feel bad about who you are as a black woman or a black man or any woman or even as a child. So you have to teach them what's not normal. And so I think that's the biggest thing as we go back to education in the church and in the schools.
Absolutely. And I think the thing that we keep saying over and over again is community, right? We have to create these communities. We have to create these social networks of safety. Family is usually the place that most of us hopefully can find a safe home, but that we're not all blessed to have that reality. So how in the community can we create safety for everyone? I know we say it quite often, and it is an African proverb, but it really does take a village to raise a child, right? And we all need to know what's going on. I think one of the beauties of growing up in the Black community, and you ladies might know better than me, growing up in the Black community, several decades ago, was that everybody was kind of in your business, right? All the church ladies, all the grandmas are sitting on the porch watching you walk by. Your parents didn't even have to worry about where you were from, the street lights turning on to the street lights turning off, because the whole community was looking out for you and watching you. And we have to figure out how we can create these social networks again of safety for ourselves as a community, looking out for each other, looking out for the young folk. And I saw someone say, like, well, the kids aren't going to school right now. That's true. So how do we translate that into some virtual communities of safety nets? Are there places or times that we can set up where kids can come and find places of refuge, right? Where they can find other like-minded students, where they can know that they're not alone and they're not isolated. Same thing for the women or the men who are being abused. And so it really is incumbent, I think, upon us to create those communities and those social networks.
And you know what? I also want to add that anyone who's really being abused to the point that they feel that they're in danger and they're being hurt, that they shouldn't feel as if they can't reach out because we're under this quarantine. There are hotlines, and I'm sure that they would be able to provide information. I'm sure that in some circumstances, they are still taking family, women and children usually is who ends up going to the different safe houses. So don't sit there thinking you have to take it because we're under quarantine, because there are options. And that would be considered to be critical or maybe an emergency if you really need to get out of a situation where you're being harmed.
I think that's a great point. Oh, go ahead, Anissa.
Oh, I was just going to say, just to echo what Dr. Jackson is saying, and she jumped in it before I could say it, and it was about using the hotlines, but I just wanted to connect something that you said, Kamara, and that is that within the Black community, this is an issue that our community chooses to remain silent on. Mm-hmm. Again, we know everybody's business, but when it comes to domestic violence on any level, what is our common phrase? Oh, that's grown folks' business. That's the term that's used. They don't want to get involved in it. So I think, again, I've had the opportunity to volunteer and serve on a board called Leah House in the Bronx, where we helped women transition from relational abuse. It was a Christian-based organization, but we helped women transition, and we, for the most part, supported a safe house and allowed women to stay there for a year until they could gain employment, engage in self-care and healing, and then move on. And I'm hoping that as a result of this coronavirus situation, we'll recognize the need to pool monies within our community, that every community should have some kind of transition house. Every community should have a safe space where people could go. Because I think it's so very important that women feel that there's some place safe that they can go and heal, even if it's a year to 6 months to a year, so that they can move on from these relational abusive situations. And then lastly, I'll say, if you know someone that currently is already a part of the system as it relates to a social work case, it's my understanding, at least in New York, I'm not sure what's happening in other places, but I believe that it's most likely also the same. The social workers are still moving forward with their cases, because I know social workers, and they're still moving forward with their cases and their obligations. But what they're doing is they're in their cars outside of the house, and they're asking for those family members to come out so that they can still do some kind of visual observation of what's taking place within the home. Because they also right now, they're also being quarantined and they have to also use precaution, but they are finding creative ways to do that. And when we talk about Black women, there are a lot of Black women who are social workers, who are in many ways who have put themselves at risk because they're doing this work right now. So the work is still going on. I think we do need to find an innovative way at this time to pool resources to create transition homes for Black women and children. But I think we also, as Dr. Karen has said, we have to help people to define what healthy is. If we don't understand what healthy is, how can we understand the difference between a healthy relationship and a toxic relationship? And again, for anyone who's listening today, it's so important for you to understand that verbal abuse is a situation where someone is consistently attacking your self-esteem. Okay, they're consistently attacking your self-worth. And if you find yourself in that situation right now, that is a very unhealthy place for you to be. And this is when you need to reach out to the church or to a counselor or to a friend that you trust so that you can get the help that you need at this time. You should not have to remain isolated, and you should not need to feel at this time that there's no one to help and that the resources are not there. Here we do have the hotline. I encourage people to share the hotlines based on what the communities that are being represented today on this chat.
Great, thank you. So another theme that I'm seeing in the chat and that we've been talking about is access to money, economic empowerment. How do we access that money? And I'm going to tie this a little bit to politics. So oftentimes people always wonder, how do some of these big conglomerate corporations not have to pay taxes or get these big government contracts, et cetera, et cetera? And the secret sauce is something called a lobby group. So they hire lobbyists who go to Washington, D.C. or to the state council, and they say, hey, my company does XYZ. Can we put a policy in place that says that folks need XYZ? And then can I be a bidder on that government contract? By the time it goes public, they already know, they've already made their deal, and they get these contracts, right? And one of the and the reason I bring that up is because we need to start playing this game. We need to come together as a coalition and create lobby groups, hire lobbyists, become lobbyists ourselves, and understand how to get down there to DC, to the state Senate houses, and enact policies that will empower us, empower our communities, empower our businesses. And this is why it's even more important. So now that I can put an economic tie to why it's important for you to go out and vote, this is why I'm telling you right now, things happen in the Senate House, in your state Senate, that you do not even know about, but you are affected by it when you are paying your bills. So the rates on the utilities that are coming up, the idea that anytime that you try to put on a utility, they have the they can run your credit. These are all political policies that are put in place that allow these companies to do this, that then affect your bottom line. It affects how much money you get in your paycheck, how much money you use for these particular utilities. So anyone who says, I don't want to be involved in politics, you're already involved in politics by virtue of living a life and existing here in the United States of America. You are involved in politics, everything. And so I definitely think it's so important that we go out and we try to form some kind of lobby group or lobby coalition around the things that are important to us, and really have a strategic plan around how we're going to get some of those policies enacted and then get those funds transferred over to us. Mom, I think you were.
Yeah, that goes back to what I was saying, because you can do that, but you have to have people who are going to listen. So you got to vote the right people in, the people who are sensitive to and concerned about helping our communities. Because you mentioned the financial, but also many of the things that affect insurance and reimbursement and how you get medical care and what kinds of decisions are made on a political level. And a lot of that is not federal. Most of that is state, in terms of, you know, Medicare, Medicaid, what's approved, what's not approved, how you can get this, how you can get that, what hospitals are funded, what clinics are supported. And so we really have to take very, very seriously our voices being heard through the vote and through, like you said, forming these lobby coalitions.
And I would say, you know, we need to reach out to our local legislators for help and support. And I'll give you a good example with Long Island Girl Talk, which is a nonprofit organization. We were in a financial crisis until we received a legislative grant. And we received that legislative grant from Taylor Darling, who's an African-American woman who was, you know, voted in by us. That's why it's important for us to be voting and to be supporting each other, because we know that someone like Assemblywoman Darling is more likely to what? Support the local programs that are supporting our youth. And so I think one thing we can do right now is reach out to the current legislators who are in office and ask them for support and help. What resources do they have that they can share with the community? But also, secondly, think about the future. More of us need to be running for these positions, and in addition to voting. Right? And don't forget that local aspect, because I think very often we get totally caught up in national politics because they're a lot more glamorous, and you hear about that all the time on the news. You don't hear as much about what's going on locally, but locally really affects you. And there is this trickle down effect in terms of the kind of money that is available to get things done in your community.
That's absolutely right. And I love the fact, Marsha, that you said, let's look at our current legislatures, the folks that sit on our state legislature. I mean, can any of us think, I mean, let's all be honest, right? Like, do you know all of your state legislature? Do you know who represents your actual district? If you don't, this might be a good time to Google once you get off this call to action. Google, who are your state legislators, so that you can go ahead, find out which party they represent, how they voted on different bills, and then go ahead and reach out to them. They actually have to, I won't say they have to, but they have an obligation to respond to you when you reach out to them. Because think about it, we all pay taxes, every single one of us. Even those of us who may be undocumented on this call, we all pay taxes in some way, shape, form, or another, because we pay for things that are taxed, we pay for utilities that are taxed. Some way, shape, or form, we pay taxes, and those taxes pay for their salary. And I know lots of folks who will pay for, let's say, some food. You don't like that food, you send it back, you want a refund, you want something back, right? And yet we give out our tax dollars and we don't hold anyone to task for what they're doing with our tax money.
Mm-hmm.
This is a time that we can do that. We're all, a lot of us, unless we're essential workers, we are sitting at home right now. We are working from home. We have some time to just go on our best friend right now, Google, and figure out who those people are. They have an email address, and go ahead and email them, call them, and say, you know, I have XYZ problem. Or you just want to get to know them, want to know their platform, want to know what's going on, etc. This is the time, because everything that they think is affecting you right now. Everything that's been put in place is affecting you right now. So I just love that idea of holding these people to task. You're paying their salary. In some ways, they are beholden to you, and you should not be. And this is why I'm bringing this up, because I don't want you to be afraid to reach out to them as if they live in some white ivory tower and you can't touch them. No, they are human beings and you can reach them, and please do, because our voices need to be heard. On the invite, I said, I am Black woman. Yes, I matter. Yes, we do matter. And the way that we ensure that we matter through the census, that's our vote. Through the census, through voting, and through letting people know that we exist and we have a voice and we're important, that they can't just run roughshod through us, through our communities, and not care about who we are as people, only care about what we can do for them as essential workers. That's a problem.
And I'll just add, Kumar, that again, from a political perspective, when we look at why we may feel silenced in many ways, is that those individuals who are politicians and within the political structure, because I've been a part of it, they look at two things. They look at economics. How is your community going to contribute to this campaign? And if you don't have money to make major contributions, then in many ways, you're going to be silenced. But there's one way that we can, and that is by voting. If we bring in the votes, they have to pay attention to us, all right? And so I just want to just reinforce this whole issue. We have to vote, okay? Maybe because, and this is what happens in the community. Those individuals who own businesses have a say, okay? Those individuals who make contributions have a say. That's our reality. We can't change that right now, but we can shift it by forcing them to look at the votes. Within our area, again, for my area, city of Long Beach, African Americans are only 6% of the population, which means that they were never really interested in having someone give voice to issues that really address the community. But what we were able to do is we were able to bring in the votes. And because it was on a historic number, they had to pay attention to what was being said. The second piece is policy. Those individuals who we put in to power, whoever these people are, whether they're white or Black, we have to push them in terms of the policy, which means we have to, within our local communities, we have to have a collective agenda. What is the agenda? We can't tell the person, this is what I want you to do, and this is the agenda after they're voted in. We have to present that information before they're voted in, because we have to ask them questions about that agenda. What are you going to do about the educational disparities in my community? How the money is spent, right? We need to ask that question before. How much money are you going to invest within Black businesses? Are you going to help with starting businesses? Are you giving grant money or loans, right? Because we know that that's one of the major reasons why we have a smaller percentage of Black-owned businesses within certain areas, because of the loans, right? But if they're really talking about economic stability, then where's the money that we're giving? Where's the grant money, right? So we have to hold them accountable for these things, which means that we need an agenda. And we have to come together as communities, and who's gonna set that agenda? Black women who are on this call, we need to set that agenda. And then we also need to hold those people who are in power responsible. We need to flood the phone lines. We need to flood the social media, put pressure. All of us at this point who are on this call, we know how to use change.org. Get those petitions going. We have to find ways to rally and to mobilize. And I think that's the one thing. And I believe it was Malcolm X that said that it's not that we're outnumbered, we're just out-organized. So we need to organize, right? And I hope that this will really set some fire today as we talk about Sisters on Fire, the people who are on this call. Let's mobilize, let's get organized so that we can fight for our communities.
That's awesome. I love that. Amen. Yeah. So I definitely I had so much, and this always happens to me, I like have so much content that I want to get through, and then I realized, okay, we actually only have 40 minutes. I mean, the power of what we've been talking about has really, I decided let's go with it. Like, I'm going to throw my agenda away because I thought that what we are discussing is just so valuable and so important, and everyone needs to hear it. And hopefully these feel like little nuggets of calls to action. But I do want to ensure that I am being respectful of folks who sent over their questions in advance. And so I do want to just get to some of the questions that were sent via the RSVP. And then those of you guys who are on the call, feel free to, as you've been doing so well, give some comments, some snaps, some claps, and also ask questions. And as I read them in the chat, I will also ask. But here is our first one. Do you think Black women will ever be seen as equal to their peers?
Well, I think the silence is the answer. No one said yes.
I mean, we're a long ways from that, honestly.
Yes.
Unfortunately.
I think maybe, yeah, you're right, Dr. Jackson. I think and this might be a good thing that we've gotten to a point where we're not even looking for that. I think we're now more about finding that within ourselves and being accepting of ourselves, knowing full well that we most likely will not be accepted as peers by other groups. But if we find that sense of security and self-worth in ourselves, it really doesn't matter, right? That's my response to that.
And I also think it's certainly not something that we should strive for. That's one of the things we're talking about. We're talking about ways to empower ourselves and our families and our communities. And, you know, we shouldn't give up. But, you know, you're asking how we're going to be able to change other people's attitudes and approaches to us. And, you know, therein lies the significant problem in terms of all the disparities that we see. And I'm going to go back to healthcare because that's what I do. But Kumar, you talked about, you know, institutional racism and the stress that we're under. And I don't think people realize, as you said, slavery, quote unquote, is gone, but that trickle down effect and how it has had a lasting effect on our communities is still there. And a lot of that, it's not so much our attitudes, it's the attitudes of people towards us, even when they don't know it. For example, they may be looking at us in a different way and not always be aware that they're thinking differently when they see a face of color versus when they see a white face. I mean, that's just the way that it is. And I think that's why we were all saying we don't think so, because it's like, how do you change all of these years of that type of approach and those ingrained attitudes? You know, one way is to start with the young children. Children are not born prejudiced. They have no idea. It's learned. And so as part of the educational process, it's something that we need to think about starting from very early on and trying to overcome some of those things that lead to the disparities.
Yes, I agree with that. I think what we look at too from the church is we have to recognize that there's a difference between us. We're all women. Physically, we're the same. But as Dr. Jackson said, we've grown up from different angles with slavery. So we have to recognize our uniqueness and difference and let it not be a bad thing, but let it be a good thing. Okay, unfortunately, we were slaves, but we can't keep that mentality. We've got to grow. We have to accept that that is who we are, but that's not who we're going to stay. So we're going to grow. And by having this forum where we see, even as Dr. Jackson, a female Black doctor, female Black professors, all of this, a lot of people don't see this in the Black community. Right. So they don't know it. The only thing they know is maybe, like you said, the essential workers, the store workers or whatever. So we can get to them, if we can take the social media platform and show them there is a difference between us who don't know and us who know, and give them the wisdom. And that's what I do in the church, to show them that it's okay to be a Black woman and be unique. Yes, we all grew up in different times, but we all have that same challenge that we're Black to overcome. And you can overcome it, because the thing is to be proud to be Black. And that's what we have to teach them. And I teach them that in the church, even as a church, because they look at the church and they say, oh, we dance, we're loud, we're this. Listen, that's who we are. That's how God works in us. We don't have to be the same. And so it's okay to dance. It's okay to shout. It's okay. If that's the way you preach, that's the way you preach. If you preach another way, but we've got to, as Marcia said, be acceptable in ourselves and be our own best friend and recognize who we are in the church as Black women and as the physical part. And education is the key.
I think that's so accurate. I saw that Lisa, and I just wanted to ask this question because I feel like it's a good marry into all the things that we've been talking about. Lisa asked, how can our communities unify better? You know, as we know, there's lots of division amongst ourselves, and that is, again, a product of slavery. That is, again, a product of institutionalized racism. As woke as some of us may be, we are all products of that same system. We are all victims of that system. So how can our communities unify better?
I think with the church teaching them. The church, when we come in on Sundays, we don't only have to teach about Christ, but in the Bible, it teaches us about unity. So you can come from that, you can come from the wisdom aspect and the unity aspect. We're supposed to be unified. We're not supposed to be tearing each other down. We're not supposed to be judging. Judge not, for you won't be judged. So you have to look at a lot of times we judge people just at the way they look, where they live, what they see, and we come to a conclusion before they open their mouths. And so in the church, you have to tell them, don't judge somebody because they don't worship like you, or they don't praise like you, or they don't pray like you, or they didn't grow up like you. Don't judge them, but be honest about the situation and recognize that there's a difference, but we can come together and use our differences to arise instead of pull down.
And I saw someone just wrote something about it's a matter of trust. And one of the things that I was going to say is, you know, one of the issues that we face sometimes, and I really hate to say this, but sometimes we're our own worst enemies because, Kumar, you know, we've talked about Black businesses. They don't just go under because of the kinds of things we're talking about. We don't support Black businesses. We are a huge economic power in terms of spending dollar and in terms of the amount of money that we, especially as Black women, spend. And we need to channel that support to Black-owned businesses, and we don't generally. It's a real problem. And, you know, I don't know if it's just a matter of trust or whether there are other things going on, but it is something that we need to address.
Absolutely, and I think one of the ways is to definitely break down our own preconceived notions around ourselves, notions of elitism, notions of the things that divide us. And, you know, Mom, you and I have talked quite a bit about how we spend a lot of money. You will notice that all the marketing in this country is generally directed at Black people because we might not have a lot, but we spend. Whatever we do have, it's right out of our pockets into somebody else's hand. And we are willing to spend money on going to get our nails done at the Korean nail shop and going to the wig store that's owned by the Asian male, and not necessarily looking online to find, hey, are there any Black wig makers out here that I might be able to support? Hey, are there any Black folk out here who are doing nails that I might be able to support? And I do think it's so important to realize the economic power of our dollar. And we really need to go, I don't want to say out of our way, but oftentimes I try to support as many Black businesses as I possibly can. Everyone knows this kind of about me. I'm wearing a whole bunch of stuff that I got from Black businesses because I go out of my way to go find them, to go support, to be a part of these networks. When someone says they're starting a business, I try to support it as much as I possibly can. And that's all we can do. We have to support. We do have the money to support each other because we are supporting others. And I also think that because of institutionalized racism, we kind of have a higher bar, in a weird way, for Black businesses than we do for businesses that are owned by white folks. And I mean, we will go to a chain restaurant that treats us terribly, et cetera, and we might not go to that same exact location, but we'll still continue to go to that same chain restaurant instead of finding the restaurants that are Black owned. And yeah, maybe they're a little slower on service. Maybe they don't have all the high tech things that we have. But to me, that's an okay bar versus, hey, I'm going to these institutions that have a lot of my money, but don't see me as a person and think it's okay to treat me however they would like to treat me. And I think oftentimes we do that. We are okay with falling for that okie doke because they have a brand name associated with them. And we are okay with less than stellar quality for the brand name, but we expect very high standards and stellar quality for the Black businesses, which don't get me wrong, I think you should always have high standards, but I'm just saying when we put apples to apples, it's a problem because we will continue to pay our money for the folks who have not treated us well and not give our money back to our own communities. And I think we need to re-judge our thinking and really try as much as possible to support, like you said, Dr. Karen, the churches, the businesses that we are currently seeing, anyone who's sort of a gig worker. You know, I'm doing a lot of, deliveries, and I find that a lot of times those are Black and brown people who are delivering to me. And I don't do just a minimum $5 tip. I always tip them over that because they're going out and taking the they're taking the risks that I'm not taking so that I can stay home. And B, I know that they're out there doing the work because they have to. No one is doing Instacart because I just want to do it for fun. People are doing it because they have to. They need that money. And so I always give a little bit extra for our Black and brown workers.
I just want to add to this because I do love that we are being self-critical, but I also don't want us to forget that a lot of these behaviors, especially among African-American women, are learned behaviors. We were taught not to trust each other. We were taught to consider our beauty as inferior. So then when you are confronted with other women of color, you're not celebrating them, you can't celebrate yourself. So you have a negative attitude towards them. All of this began in slavery, kind of being indoctrinated to not be able to value yourself. And so again, if you can't value yourself, you can't value your sister because your sister is you. So we have to understand where these behaviors came from, where we won't go to a Black business or we'll be very competitive with other women of color or we don't trust them. Once we're understanding where these behaviors came from and that these are learned behaviors, then that can be a part of healing to overcome those behaviors, right? Once we understand that, and then spreading that awareness to other individuals. I've had a hard time overcoming some of these ideas because I definitely grew up with them. But once I learned where did these attitudes come from, I learned, it came from my parents, but where did they get it from? They weren't born with it. They were taught it by the white man. The white man said, you're inferior. So why would you go to a Black business if you think you're inferior? So once I started connecting those dots, I said, don't believe that, give that Black business a chance, or, trust your sister, at least give her a chance to fail. Don't automatically shut her down. And also, try to be someone who is helping other women of color, and at least taking that kind of chance. Because again, we had a powerful sisterhood, but it was systematically destroyed by racism. But it was not something that never existed, right? But it's been systematically destroyed, and when we realize, this is a part of a system, I think then we can be more resistant to saying, no, this reason I don't trust her, that I've been socialized not to trust her. I'm not going to fall into that. Not falling into that one. Okay, they don't want me to trust my sister. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to trust her.
Yeah, I think just to add, and I think everybody has really raised excellent points. This is really about dealing with slavery, or not dealing, or choosing not to deal with slavery, and not being open and honest about some of the things that were learned. I think also recognizing that we have a beautiful history before slavery.
Right.
That
Yes.
we were kings and queens, and we need to embrace that wonderful, amazing heritage that was given to us. But I think also in the midst of slavery and the trauma that's associated with slavery, we need to remember that not only were we separated, but also our relationships were devalued. That you separated families. So we had to create our own kin network because you didn't have your family, your blood family anymore. If you were engaged or married to someone within the slave culture, it wasn't even acknowledged. So again, in terms of sisterhood, maybe you were married to someone, but because they want to create other children and breed, your husband was taken away and given to the sister that you were sitting next to in the field. So this is where it starts. But unfortunately, we are still dealing with internalized racism. And what we have to do when that moment hits us is we have to, even if we have to speak it out loud and say, I'm not going to accept that thought that I'm inferior. I'm not going to accept that thought that I'm a second-class citizen, or that somebody within my community is second rate. We have to address that issue, and we have to hit it head on. And we have to also continue to fight with the colorism that takes place within our community. That we're still looking at people differently and treating them differently based on the color of their skin, right? We have to do that. And we're the only people that can heal if we're not talking about this issue, because that's what's breaking us down, okay? And it's hurting us. It's hurting us that there's something wrong with us saying that I'm going to not support someone within my own community and see it as less than. When we weren't created to be or to think less than, because the African concept is we, the American dominant culture concept is I. And so we have to come back and think about us as a community. And it's unfortunate because our forefathers fought so much for integration that people would see us finally, our peers would see us and accept us. But integration has actually weakened our community because our children need to see people from various backgrounds, which means that we need to come to a place where we as a community, we expand our definition of Blackness. Blackness just can't be something small in a box, because Blackness is not a homogeneous experience. All of us have different pieces of Blackness. Blackness can be, if I just take a popular figure, popular culture, Blackness can be Yolanda Adams, but Blackness can also be Macy Gray. Blackness can be Sarah Vaughan. It can be all of these people, right?
All of
it
us
doesn't
here
have to
on
be
this call.
one thing. And so that's why we're still struggling, because we want to say my Blackness has to be your Blackness, but no, it's all the same, because it all starts with triumph, but then also leads with in terms of dealing with oppression and suffering. So if I'm suffering on my level might be different from your level. And so we need to say as a community, to finally answer the question, as a community, we're all going through different experiences, but that's okay. And we're not always gonna all agree, but we're gonna actually sit down and talk as a community on how we're gonna help each other, because other communities do that. I see it every day living in the city of Long Beach. People who don't even speak to each other, they hate each other. When it comes down to getting something for their school district, they fill the place up, right? They're there, right? Because now they have a unified purpose. So hopefully the people who are here on this call, again, we want to empower you. Let's put all the other stuff aside you know, because you look like this, or you're wearing the same outfit I have on, or I like your shoes and you look better in that outfit, or your hair, or whatever the situation is. We have to put that aside now and say, we need to unify our communities. That's what this is about. Putting all the differences aside. We're going to be different. We're going to think differently, different mindset, but one unified purpose.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anissa. I really appreciate that. So we are at 11:42. I'm going to ask one more question from the audience, and then we'll do closing remarks. And I thought I would end on a more positive note around self-care. So how can we encourage our women to eat healthier and take better care of ourselves? How can we support with exercise and diet? And then thoughts around self-care and mental health.
Well, I mean, I think I'll go back to something I said a little bit earlier, and I think it starts from early on. But one point was made previously when we were talking about reading literacy and education. It's important to educate the children, but it's also important to educate adults, because if they don't know, then they can't support their children. You know, one of the things but children can also teach parents, because one of the ways that's been done is through these different community gardens. The vegetable gardens, a lot of times when children learn about good nutrition in school and participate in these gardens, they then bring that home, and that's very helpful. I mean, I think part of it is to really communicate with people on the level that you say, I understand where you're coming from. I'm not just trying to lecture you about what to do, but I think we do need to try to start bringing into the community how important it is to have good nutrition, to exercise. And it doesn't mean that you have to pay money to go to a gym. You don't have to spend hours working out. You can just go it's been shown that if you just do 150 minutes a week of walking, that in and of itself helps. It helps to condition your heart. It helps you to lose weight. It helps you to start thinking about other things. You can take 15 seconds, 30 seconds, just to take a little time out and to meditate, just to be, you know, in touch with yourself for a few minutes. I think it's important to do all of those things. And the other thing I think that's important is we should never body shame people. We should accept everyone for who they are, what they look like, how they carry themselves. But it is important that we also let them know that if you are really overweight and you're not eating well, that's going to affect your health, that's going to affect things like the possibility that you develop diabetes, the possibility that you have high blood pressure. And if you were destined to get those things anyway, then maybe it'll be worse. And we know from just what we're going through right now, which is one of the reasons we're having this talk today, that if you have those underlying conditions and you haven't been taking care of yourself, that if you get the virus, that you're going to suffer worse consequences from it. So I think, you know, it starts with conversation. It starts with trying to instill these in adults as well as working with our children, so we can have a meeting of the minds and have everybody participating on the same level.
Yeah, I think it's key in terms of self-care. The focus should be at a certain point in your life, you have to see yourself as worthy and you have to invest in yourself. So I think that's the question to everyone that's here on this group chat. What steps are you willing to take to invest in yourself? All right. Because that's what this is about, making an investment. Many of us give based on, we might even invest in stocks and bonds. We invest in other members of our family. You invest in your children, in your community organizations. But how will you find the time to invest in yourself? And whatever that time looks like, then you need to devote that time to yourself. For me, because I am a caretaker for my dad who has dementia, I have to literally make appointments with myself because I'm a caretaker, but then I'm also, as my colleague Marsha, I'm an educator, I'm also a community leader, and then I'm also a part of the ministerial team at my church, which means that people are pulling for me on all different levels, which means that I actually, pre-corona, and still doing it now, but pre-corona, I actually make an appointment with myself. It's on my calendar, it's on my phone, that no matter what's happening on that day, that's my time. And sometimes that time is just writing, journaling. Sometimes that time is just taking a walk. Sometimes that time is reading, right? Sometimes that time is just, you know what, I just want to just binge watch, but it's my time. In terms of self-care, because also, like Dr. Karen, I am a Christian, so it's important for me every day to engage in prayer, connecting with God, because that's my strength, but also loving myself enough to engage in healthy eating habits, and also all of us, many of us, we have our phones, we spend a lot of money for them, we need to use our phones. My phone has already beeped twice because it's telling me that I need to have some more water for the day. I keep my water reminder going. I keep my step tracker going because it reminds me every day to keep it moving. But I have to take that time, because if I'm not well, I can't help and support the people that I love. And so for all of us, I think we have to invest in ourselves so that we can do all the other work that's needed for us within our communities.
And I would like to add to that, and this is an extremely important conversation, because, you know, when we were brought here as Africans to be slaves, we were trained to be caregivers. And it's almost like this has never stopped. We're always taking care of someone else and never ourselves. So it has been extremely challenging for me to think about myself and my own care. But I get where that's coming from. I never had a model of it, and it's also historical with African American women. We dominate the helping professions. So I think self-care will look different to each person, but just even to begin that conversation with yourself and to say, what does it look like for me? And also be patient with yourself when you don't have an answer, because certainly when I asked myself that, I did not have an answer, and I knew that's a problem because I know what that looks like. That's because I've never done it. And we all need to begin that work. And I guess the second point I want to make, though, which we can do, is call each other out as sisters on this. When we see that our sister, breaking her back to take care of the kids, to take care of the husband, to do this and that in the community, we also need to call each other out and say, hey, when are you taking time for yourself? Or let's go out to dinner, or let's do something for ourselves, because we do see that in other people. And sometimes you just need that other person to say to you, hey, you're really stressed. You need a time out. In order for you to be motivated to do it. And we can help each other here, right? By saying that to each other.
Yes, that's true. I teach self-care and being responsible to self, because sometimes we'll say we're going to do it, but we don't do it. And then we're not responsible. Learn to be responsible for yourself. We're responsible for everyone else, especially pastors, and we're responsible for the congregation, but we have to be responsible for ourselves. We have to make sure we get rest, we pray, we read, we learn, and it's not only enough to get knowledge, but you have to have wisdom. As the church say, be a doer also, not just a hearer. We don't only have to hear the words, and we don't only have to learn from people, but we got to learn how to do it. We've got to put it in practice, and I think self-care, putting it in practice is harder than learning it. So we have to use our wisdom. We can't just learn it, but we got to do it. And it's not always easy. It's easier said than done. And that's why you have to be responsible to yourself. And of course, I'm going to say, always ask God for help. He'll always give you the help that you need. He may not do it right away, but if you continue to ask God, believe me, he will come through.
Much, Dr. Karen.
Yeah, I think, in terms of self-care, some of the things that have been said, we we take care of everybody else. Learn to take care of ourselves. And even before this, I would always, because I had a very busy schedule, 4 daughters, I would take what I would call little mini escapes. And my little mini escape would be a hot soaking bath with a cup of tea. I'm a tea drinker. And it's just relaxing. And even just having a cup of tea, taking a little time, if you drink coffee or whatever your beverage is. Since we've had this, been under quarantine, I make it a point every day between 2:30 and 4:30 to have my afternoon tea. And I say to my daughters, I really think it's something that as a society, we should just take a break every day and do that for ourselves. I honestly believe that, because it really just helps you to focus and helps you to feel good about yourself. So.
Absolutely. I echo that. I definitely make sure I take a bath, at least a weekly bath for 90 minutes, hot bath. That's what I do. That's my self-care. And I also love to walk just like my mother does. And like she said, 150 minutes, that's literally just finding 30 minutes a day, 5 days a week. Not that much time that you can just carve out, and take some time to yourself, enjoy nature, et cetera, get some oxygen. We
Right.
also have emphasis.
We're talking about don't cost anything.
That's right.
That's a concern. None of this costs anything.
Thank you for that. Yes. So this is all free ways to take care of yourself, which are really important now when people are struggling with their money during the coronavirus.
And I have one more point I want to make about that, because I've been a part of the Black Women's Health Study out of Harvard for about 20 years. And basically the participation is just filling out a survey every year about my eating habits and health habits and so forth. And what they have discovered about why so many women of color are suffering from these various diseases is that it's all a response to stress. We feel much more stressed, and our main source of stress is racism. And as a result, we are not taking care of ourselves, and we're developing these diseases. And then when we do, we don't even seek medical help. And if we do seek medical help, we are not given the same healthcare as other races. So this is why it is so important for us to be able to reduce the amount of stress in our lives, because that will help us then maybe control how we're self-medicating by doing other things, even drug use, alcoholism, a lot of various of these pathologies in our community, they're all a response to racism and the stress that it causes, and how, causes, and how disruptive it is to the psyche. And we have got to, start with the source of what's causing that health problem. And like I said, very often it is related to the stress that is coming from, dealing with discrimination on a daily basis.
Absolutely. You know what? We didn't even touch upon so much, including mental health, alcohol and drug abuse. And Marsha, I'm so glad to hear that you're participating, because that's a big issue. Black people do not participate in studies. And there are reasons for that. There are historical reasons why that is an issue. I'm not going to go there, because that's a whole nother discussion in and of itself. But we do need to, because that is the way that they decide how treatments work for you. A lot of the times the treatments that are given to us are treatments that are based on studies in white people or non-people of color, and it might not be the same for us. So we do need to participate in that process. But again, we don't trust the system because of things that have happened previously. So, another session, Kumara, another webinar.
This is actually a great segue, because I will talk about some upcoming sessions, because I had this epiphany this morning to turn this into a series, because I felt it's going to be much needed. So I will talk about the series going forward, but I would love to give the panelists any last words or call to action before we close out.
Well, I'll start first. My call to action is to make sure that you have salvation, that God is in your life, that you build a relationship with God. Life without God is not the same as life with God, because anyway, we're going to all go through trials and tribulations, but having God in your life makes it much easier. He can bring you healing. He can bring you help. He can bring you comfort. He can connect you with where you need to connect. He can give you the wisdom that you don't understand. And so my call to action is today is if you're not saved, to get saved. And if you don't have a church home, find a church home. And if you do have, then go to the next level. There's not only salvation, but there's sanctification. And there's more to spirituality and Christianity than what we hear and see. But you have to get the wisdom and the knowledge and the understanding of it. And so my call to action would be develop a relationship with God, even if you can't get to the building.
My call to action would be for sisters to help other sisters, right? We have a lot of opportunities on, the personal level that come up, and we don't take advantage of them. If whatever small thing we can do for each other, it starts there. Whenever I meet another woman of color, I think of how can I be, especially a younger woman, how can I be of support to this person? How can I help this person? How can we work together, even if it's just lending a listening ear? So I think we as women need to just be more supportive of each other, right? And that's how I met various people. It's this idea that I have, hey, maybe we can work together. Let me talk to you. I don't know you, but I'm going to trust you at least at first. And it's really opened up my life. And I think if we all just kind of take that approach as women of color, knowing that we have this common history, that it will help make a significant change. And it'll be a wonderful model for our daughters, right?
Yes. I mean, I echo everything everybody said. You just, we all need to take a little bit of me time. I saw that Lorna said to light a candle and just breathe. And that's one of the additional things when I do my bath. In addition to the tea, I have a candle lit because, the aromas are so pleasing and it just makes you feel so good. So I think we have to start with ourselves and then hopefully send all those positive vibes out to everyone else around us.
Okay, so I guess I'm gonna go quickly. This is a call for us to love ourselves, to embrace our mistakes, as well as our success. This is a call for us to mobilize our communities. This is a call for us to use our financial power. Just want to remind you, in this country, $1.2 billion in terms of spending. Let's use it so that we can empower each other. And then lastly, this is a call for us to mobilize as it relates to political power. Let's get counted for this year's census, and let's make a difference in this year's election.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Anissa. Okay, so for us, as I was saying, I had this epiphany this morning that we're going to turn this into a series. I feel like it's much needed. So in order to find out the information on the series, if you're on LinkedIn, please join the Black Woman Magic group that I started a couple of weeks ago. We have 100 members already. In addition, if you want to drop your email address, I will also send you the link. You can drop your email address into the chat or your social media handles, because this is about building community and sisterhood. So I want you all to get to know each other. This is part of that. That's that start. So those are my quick call to actions that you can do right now. And just so you know, this is the lineup that I have come up with in terms of topics, just to keep it in mind, but I will put it in the LinkedIn group. In June, we're going to go deep into education. In July, we're going to go deep into self-care and mental health. In August, we're going to go into parenting. In September, we're going to go into finances. In October, right in time to vote, we're going to go into politics, rocking the vote. In November, we're going to talk about entrepreneurship. And in December, we're going to talk about what I'm calling the hood. Lots of times we talk about the hood here, but when I mean the hood, I mean sisterhood, I mean brotherhood, I mean community. So let's flip that word and make it a positive word. Let's talk about the hood in December. So that's the rest of 2020. Thank you all so much for engaging with us. This has been phenomenal. Please tell everyone as we go along that we are going to continue to do these on a monthly basis. Thank you to the panelists, Dr. Karen, Marsha, Anissa, Dr. Jackson, my mother. I really appreciate you all taking the time this morning. It sounds like everyone thought this was so impactful. I learned a lot of things from you all who participated and from all the panelists. So I just want to thank you again from the bottom of my heart. Blessings for the rest of this weekend.
Thank you. God bless you.
Thank you, Kwamara, for organizing this.